The shade of the cottonwood tree was the only mercy the July sun offered that sweltering afternoon in 1882. And Miss Eleanor Hartley sat beneath its branches teaching 7 dusty children their letters while the rest of Cripple Creek, Colorado, seemed to shimmer in the heat. She wore a simple calico dress the color of forget-me-nots, and her auburn hair was pinned back sensibly, though a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. The children sat cross-legged on blankets she had brought from the boarding house where she lived, their slates balanced on their knees, their voices rising in unison as they recited the alphabet. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride as little Thomas Miller, only 6 years old and the son of a prospector, carefully traced the letter with his finger in the dust before attempting it on his slate. She had arrived in Cripple Creek 3 months earlier, traveling from Boston after responding to an advertisement seeking a schoolteacher. The mining town desperately needed someone willing to educate the children whose parents had come west seeking gold and silver in the mountains. The schoolhouse was still being constructed, a process delayed by the constant arrival of new prospectors and the prioritization of saloons and supply stores, so Eleanor had taken matters into her own hands. Every afternoon except Sunday, she gathered the children under this tree on the edge of town, where the noise of the mining operations was distant enough not to disturb their lessons. "Very good, Thomas," Eleanor said warmly, crouching beside the boy to examine his slate. "Your letters are getting straighter every day. Soon you'll be writing whole words." Thomas beamed at her, revealing a gap where he had recently lost a tooth. Eleanor felt the familiar contentment that came with teaching, the sense that she was doing something meaningful in this rough frontier town, where culture and learning often took a back seat to survival and commerce. She stood and brushed the dust from her skirt, then reached for the primer she had been reading from. "Now, let us practice our sounds. Remember, each letter has its own voice, and when we put them together, they tell us stories." The children's attention was focused entirely on her when a shadow fell across the blanket. Eleanor looked up to see a man standing at the edge of their makeshift classroom, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell past his collar. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn denim trousers, dusty boots with spurs that caught the light, and a faded red shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But it was his face that arrested her attention. He had strong features, a firm jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of weathered leather that held a sadness so profound it made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough as if he had not used it much recently, "I apologize for interrupting your lesson." Eleanor straightened, suddenly aware of how informal she must look sitting in the dirt with children. "Can I help you, sir?" The cowboy shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Several of the children had turned to stare at him with open curiosity. He glanced at them, then back at Eleanor, and she saw him swallow hard before speaking again. "I heard tell that you're the teacher here in Cripple Creek," he said. "That you're good at teaching folks things they need to know." "I do my best," Eleanor replied carefully. There was something in his demeanor that spoke of barely contained emotion, a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. "These children are learning wonderfully. Did you have a child you wished to enroll in lessons?" "No, ma'am," he said. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "It's not that. I was wondering if—" He trailed off, and Eleanor saw his jaw clench. When he looked back up at her, there was such raw vulnerability in his eyes that she felt it like a physical touch. "If you teach folks to read, I was wondering if you might teach something else, something harder." Eleanor waited, sensing that he needed time to find his words. The children had gone silent, sensing the weight of the moment. "I need someone to teach me how to love again," the cowboy said finally, the words tumbling out as if he had to say them quickly or not at all. "I know it sounds foolish. I know you don't know me from Adam. But I've been watching you with these children for the past week, and I see the way you care for them. I see the patience you have. And I thought maybe, if anyone could help a broken man remember what it feels like to have a heart that works proper, it might be someone like you." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of pickaxes striking rock and the rustle of cottonwood leaves overhead. Eleanor stared at the cowboy, completely taken aback by his request. It was perhaps the strangest thing anyone had ever asked of her, and yet there was something achingly honest about it. This was not a man making advances or speaking in the flowery language of courtship. This was someone genuinely in pain, reaching out for help in the only way he knew how. "I don't even know your name," Eleanor said softly. "James," he replied. "James Thornton. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles west of here. I've been in these parts for 6 months now." "Mr. Thornton," Eleanor began, then paused, unsure how to proceed. She was acutely aware of 7 pairs of young eyes watching this exchange. "I think perhaps we should discuss this matter at a more appropriate time. I'm in the middle of lessons." James Thornton nodded quickly, color rising in his cheeks. "Of course, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted." He began to turn away, but Eleanor found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "I'm here every afternoon from 2 o'clock until 4, she said. "Perhaps you could return after the children have gone home." James looked back at her, and for the first time, something like hope flickered in those sad eyes. "Thank you, ma'am, I'll do that." He replaced his hat, tipped it to her in a gesture of respect, and walked away with the slightly bow-legged gait common to men who spent most of their lives in a saddle. Eleanor watched him go, her mind spinning with questions and confusion. What had happened to this man to break him so thoroughly? And what on earth had possessed her to agree to see him again? "Miss Hartley, who was that?" asked Sarah Chen, the 10-year-old daughter of a Chinese laundryman. Sarah was Eleanor's brightest student, already reading at a level far beyond her years. Eleanor turned back to the children and summoned a smile. "Someone seeking help, Sarah. Now, where were we?" "Ah, yes, the sounds each letter makes. Let's continue." But for the rest of the lesson, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting to James Thornton and his extraordinary request. She had come west to teach children their letters and numbers, to bring education and enlightenment to a wild frontier town. She had not expected to be asked to heal a broken heart, yet something in the cowboy's eyes had touched her deeply. She recognized pain when she saw it. She had worn it herself not so long ago. Eleanor had left Boston to escape her own heartbreak. Edward Morrison had courted her for 2 years, promising marriage and a future together, only to announce his engagement to a wealthy merchant's daughter without warning. The betrayal had shattered Eleanor's trust and left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love. Coming west had been her way of starting fresh, of focusing on something pure and uncomplicated like teaching children. Love, she had decided, was too painful and unpredictable. Better to devote herself to work that mattered. Yet here was James Thornton, asking her to help him find his way back to the very thing she had been running from. When 4 o'clock came and the children gathered their slates and primers to head home, Eleanor found herself both nervous and curious about whether the cowboy would return. She busied herself organizing her teaching materials, stacking the slates neatly and wrapping the primers in cloth to protect them from dust. The afternoon heat was beginning to ease slightly, though the sun still blazed overhead. "Miss Hartley." Eleanor turned to find James Thornton standing at the edge of the tree's shade once more. He had removed his spurs, she noticed, as if he had wanted to approach more quietly. "Mr. Thornton," she acknowledged. "Please sit down." She gestured to one of the blankets, and after a moment's hesitation, James lowered himself to sit cross-legged on it. Eleanor sat across from him, maintaining a proper distance while still being close enough to speak privately. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the result of years spent squinting into sun and wind. He could not be much older than 30, she estimated, though the sadness in his face aged him. "I appreciate you agreeing to speak with me," James said. "I know my request earlier was unusual, strange even." "It was certainly unexpected," Eleanor admitted, but I confess you've piqued my curiosity. What exactly do you mean when you ask someone to teach you to love again? Love is not like reading or arithmetic. It cannot be taught from a book. James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ground between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. 3 years ago, I was married. Her name was Catherine. We had a ranch in Wyoming, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We were planning to start a family. He paused, and Eleanor saw his hands clench into fists on his knees. There was a fire. The house went up in the middle of the night. I got out, but Catherine didn't. I tried to go back in for her, but the heat drove me back. I could hear her calling for me, and I couldn't reach her. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with sympathy. Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry. I haven't been able to feel anything since then, James continued, the words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. I go through the motions. I work, I eat, I sleep. But inside, it's like something died along with Catherine. I look at the world and I can't find joy in it. I see couples walking together and I feel nothing but emptiness. I've tried to move on, tried to tell myself that Catherine would want me to live, but I don't know how anymore. And then I saw you with those children and I saw the way you care for them. I saw genuine kindness and warmth in you. I thought maybe if I spent time around that, around someone who still knows how to feel things properly, maybe I could learn again. Eleanor sat with his words, feeling the weight of his grief and the magnitude of what he was asking. This was not about romance or courtship. This was about a man so lost in his pain that he had forgotten how to be human. I cannot promise to heal you, Eleanor said carefully. Grief is not a lesson that can be unlearned, but I think I understand what you're truly asking. You want to remember how to connect with another person. You want to feel alive again. James looked up at her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes, though he did not let them fall. Yes, he said simply. That's it exactly. Eleanor made a decision that she knew might be foolish, that certainly would raise eyebrows among the more proper residents of Cripple Creek, but that felt right nonetheless. Then here is what I propose. You may join me here each afternoon after the children leave. We will talk. I will tell you about my day, about the students and their progress, about the books I'm reading. You will tell me about your work at the ranch, about the horses and cattle, about whatever occupies your thoughts. We will practice the simple act of two people sharing their lives with each other. There will be no pressure, no expectations beyond honest conversation. Does that sound acceptable? James nodded, a visible loosening in his shoulders as if he had been holding himself rigid with tension. More than acceptable, ma'am. Thank you. Please call me Eleanor. If we're to have honest conversations, we should dispense with excessive formality. Eleanor, James repeated as if testing the name, and you should call me James. Very well, James. Eleanor found herself smiling slightly. Now, since this is our first proper conversation, why don't you tell me about the Double R Ranch? I've heard the name, but I know little about it. For the next hour, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, James told her about his work. The Double R was a cattle ranch owned by two brothers, Richard and Robert Ramsey, who had come from Texas 5 years earlier. James's job was managing the horses, breaking and training them for ranch work and occasionally for sale. He spoke haltingly at first, clearly unused to casual conversation, but gradually his words came easier. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions about things she did not understand, genuinely interested in this world so different from her own. In turn, she told him about her students, about Thomas's determination to master his letters despite having no books at home, about Sarah's voracious appetite for knowledge, about the challenges of teaching children whose ages ranged from 6 to 13 in a single group. James listened with an intensity that suggested he was starved for this kind of ordinary human interaction. When the shadows grew long and Eleanor knew she needed to return to her boarding house before supper, James stood and offered her his hand to help her to her feet. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, but his grip was gentle and respectful. "May I help you carry your things?" he asked, gesturing to the blankets and teaching materials. That would be kind of you, thank you. They walked together through the dusty streets of Cripple Creek toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, where Eleanor rented a small room on the second floor. The town was coming alive with the evening crowd, miners finishing their shifts and heading to saloons, women hurrying to complete errands before dark. Several people gave Eleanor and James curious looks, but she kept her head high. She had done nothing improper. At the boarding house steps, James returned the blankets to her. "Same time tomorrow," he asked, and there was a tentative hopefulness in his voice that tugged at Eleanor's heart. "Same time tomorrow," she confirmed. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, Eleanor reflected on the unexpected turn her day had taken. She had come to teach children, and somehow she had taken on the far more complex task of helping a grieving cowboy remember how to feel. Part of her wondered if she was equipped for such a responsibility. She was still nursing her own wounds from Edward's betrayal, still learning to trust again herself. But another part of her, the part that had always been drawn to helping others, felt called to this work. James Thornton had shown remarkable courage in asking for help. The least she could do was try to provide it. True to his word, James appeared beneath the cottonwood tree the following afternoon just as the last child was packing up their slate. Eleanor had been half expecting him not to come, thinking that perhaps in the light of day he would regret his vulnerability. But there he was, hat in hand, waiting patiently at her respectful distance until the children had gone. They fell into an easy pattern over the following weeks. Each afternoon, after Eleanor's lessons concluded, James would join her beneath the tree. Sometimes they talked about substantial things, their childhoods and families, their dreams and disappointments. Other times they discussed trivial matters, the weather or town gossip or the quality of the boarding house meals. Gradually, Eleanor began to see changes in James. The deep sadness in his eyes remained, but it was no longer the only thing she saw there. Occasionally, when she said something amusing, she would catch a flicker of a smile on his lips. His posture became less rigid, his words came more freely. One August afternoon, James arrived carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on his ride into town. "I saw these growing near the creek," he said, offering them to her almost shyly. "They reminded me of you, bright and determined, thriving where others might not expect them to." Eleanor took the flowers, surprised by the gesture and by the poetry in his words. "Thank you, James, they're lovely." It was the first time he had given her anything, and she recognized it for what it was, a sign that he was beginning to feel again, to think about someone else's happiness. She pressed the flowers carefully in one of her books that night, wanting to preserve them. As summer deepened into autumn, Eleanor found herself looking forward to their afternoon conversations with an eagerness that surprised her. James had become more than a project or a person she was helping. He had become a friend, someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, wondering what he was doing, whether he was having a good day at the ranch. It was Sarah Chen who first voiced what Eleanor had been trying not to acknowledge. One October afternoon, as Eleanor was organizing slates after the lesson, Sarah lingered behind the other children. "Miss Hartley, are you going to marry Mr. Thornton?" the girl asked with the blunt curiosity of the young. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Sarah, that's not an appropriate question. But you like him, don't you? I can tell by the way you smile when he comes." Eleanor sat back on her heels and looked at her student seriously. "Mr. Thornton is my friend. He's been through difficult times and I'm helping him, that's all." Sarah's expression suggested she did not entirely believe this explanation, but she was too polite to press further. "I think he's nice, and he looks at you like you're important." After Sarah had run off to join her father at his laundry, Eleanor sat beneath the cottonwood tree pondering the girl's words. Did James look at her as if she were important? And more pressingly, how did she look at him? She had told herself their arrangement was about friendship, about helping someone heal. But somewhere along the way, had it become something more? When James arrived that afternoon, Eleanor found herself studying him with new awareness. He had filled out slightly since their meetings began, the gauntness of grief easing as he remembered to eat properly. There was color in his face from the autumn sun, and when he smiled at her in greeting, the expression reached his eyes for the first time. "You're looking thoughtful today," James observed as he settled onto the blanket across from her. "Difficult lesson?" "No, the children were wonderful as always." Eleanor hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Sarah asked me today if we were going to get married." James's eyes widened and Eleanor saw him swallow hard. "What did you tell her?" "I told her we were friends, that I was helping you." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "But it made me think, James. When you first came to me, you asked me to teach you to love again. I've been treating that as if you meant learning to love life, learning to feel joy and connection in general. But was that truly what you meant?" James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know what I meant, truthfully. I was drowning and you were a lifeline. I just knew I needed help and something told me you could provide it." He paused, then continued more softly. "But these past months, Eleanor, they've been the best I've had since Catherine died. Not because I've forgotten her or stopped grieving, but because you've reminded me that there's still good in the world, that there are still reasons to wake up in the morning beyond mere survival." "I've enjoyed our time together as well," Eleanor admitted. "More than I expected to. When I came west, I thought I was done with matters of the heart. I'd been hurt, and I convinced myself that dedicating my life to teaching was enough. But knowing you has reminded me that connection with another person, real genuine connection, is one of life's greatest gifts." James leaned forward slightly. "Eleanor, I need to be honest with you about something. Somewhere along the way, these meetings stopped being just about me learning to feel again. Somewhere along the way, I started falling in love with you." Eleanor's heart began to race. She had been half expecting these words, half dreading them, because they forced her to confront her own feelings. "James, I know it's probably too soon," he continued, words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back for weeks. "I know I'm still healing, and I know you have your own reasons for being cautious about love. I'm not asking you to return my feelings or to make any promises. I just needed you to know the truth. These afternoons with you have become the center of my days. When I'm working with the horses, I'm thinking about what I'll tell you later. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to share it with. And when I look at you, I don't just see someone who's helping me. I see someone remarkable and kind and strong. I see someone I could build a life with, if you'd ever want that." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. James was offering her exactly what Edward had promised and failed to deliver: genuine love from someone who saw her clearly and valued her for who she truly was. But accepting it meant risking her heart again, meant opening herself to potential pain. "I'm frightened," she said honestly. "I'm frightened because I have feelings for you too, James. I think I've been falling in love with you for weeks now, maybe longer. But I'm scared of being hurt again. I'm scared of trusting someone with my heart and having them break it." James shifted closer, and with a tentative movement, he reached out and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched beyond a polite handshake in weeks of conversation, and Eleanor felt the warmth of his skin send awareness through her entire body. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you," James said quietly. "I'm human, and I'll make mistakes. But I can promise that any hurt would never be intentional, and I can promise that I would spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. You've taught me something important these past months, Eleanor. You've taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means finding the courage to build a future despite the pain we've endured. Catherine will always be part of my history, a chapter of my life that shaped me. But she would want me to live, to love again. And I want to love you if you'll let me." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller and ink-stained from writing lessons for the children. They were different in so many ways, he a cowboy who worked with his hands and body, she a teacher who worked with minds and hearts, yet they fit together in a way that felt right. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll let you." James let out a breath he seemed to have been holding, and when Eleanor looked up at him, she saw joy written plainly across his face. It transformed him, erasing years of sorrow and revealing the man he might have been without tragedy. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture of such old-fashioned tenderness that Eleanor felt her last defenses crumble. "May I court you properly?" James asked. "I want to do this right, Eleanor. I want to take you to dinner, to walk with you through town, to introduce you to the Ramsey brothers and let them see what an extraordinary woman has agreed to give me a chance." Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Yes to all of that, though I should warn you, there's going to be gossip. The schoolteacher and the cowboy will be the talk of Cripple Creek." "Let them talk," James said with more confidence than Eleanor had ever heard from him. "I'm not ashamed of caring for you, I'm proud of it." They sat together as the autumn sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, hands clasped, talking about the future instead of the past for the first time. James told her about his dreams of eventually owning his own small ranch, a modest place where he could raise horses. Eleanor shared her hope of seeing the schoolhouse completed, of having a proper classroom with desks and a chalkboard and shelves full of books. "When the schoolhouse is finished, will you still teach under this tree sometimes?" James asked, glancing up at the cottonwood's branches, now turning gold with the season. "Perhaps in good weather," Eleanor said. "This tree has become special to me, it's where I fell in love." James smiled, and it was like watching the sun emerge from behind clouds. "It's special to me too. It's where I learned to live again." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and blossomed. James courted Eleanor with all the earnest intensity of a man who had been given a second chance at happiness. He took her to dinner at the best restaurant Cripple Creek had to offer, a modest establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Kowalski, who served hearty Polish food that reminded Eleanor of the immigrant neighborhoods in Boston. He accompanied her on walks through town, proudly introducing her to people he knew from the ranch and the supply stores. True to his word, James brought Eleanor to the Double R Ranch on a sunny Sunday in late October. The ranch was larger than Eleanor had imagined, sprawling across a valley with mountains rising dramatically in the background. The main house was a solid two-story structure built from timber and stone, and there were several outbuildings including a large barn and multiple corrals. The Ramsey brothers greeted Eleanor warmly. Richard, the elder at 40, was a bear of a man with a full beard and a booming laugh. Robert, 35, was leaner and quieter, but his eyes were sharp and kind. Both men clearly held James in high regard. "About time you brought her out here," Richard said, clapping James on the shoulder hard enough to stagger him. "We've been hearing about the schoolteacher for months. James talks about you so much we feel like we already know you." Eleanor blushed, but found herself liking these rough, straightforward men. Over a lunch of beef stew and fresh bread prepared by Maria, the ranch's cook and housekeeper, the Ramsey brothers regaled her with stories about James's skill with horses. "He's got a gift," Robert said seriously. "Some men break horses through force, but James has a way of understanding them. He gentles them, earns their trust. We've got ranchers coming from 3 counties over to buy horses James has trained." James looked uncomfortable with the praise, but also pleased. After lunch, he showed Eleanor around the ranch, introducing her to the horses he was currently working with. There was a beautiful chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead that James explained had been wild until recently. "She was terrified of people," James said, stroking the mare's neck as she stood calmly beside him. "Took me 3 weeks just to get close enough to touch her, but I was patient and eventually she realized I meant her no harm. Now look at her." Eleanor watched the way the horse leaned into James's touch, clearly trusting him completely. "You have a remarkable gift," she said. "The way you connect with these animals, it's beautiful." James looked at her over the horse's back, his expression tender. "You taught me something important about connection, Eleanor. You showed me that trust has to be earned through consistency and patience, through showing up day after day and proving yourself worthy of it. That lesson applies to horses just as much as it applies to people." As they walked back toward the main house, James showed her a piece of land on the eastern edge of the ranch property. It was a gentle slope overlooking a creek with cottonwood trees growing along the water's edge. "The Ramseys have offered to sell me this parcel," James said quietly. 5 acres. Enough for a small house and a corral, room for me to train horses independently while still working for the ranch. I've been saving money, and I almost have enough for the land and materials to start building. Eleanor's breath caught. "James, that's wonderful." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I'm thinking about the future, Eleanor. I'm planning for a life that has room in it for more than just work. I'm building toward something, and I'm hoping that something might include you." "It's only been 2 months since we acknowledged our feelings," Eleanor said, though her heart was racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Are you certain you're ready for this? Ready for us?" "I've never been more certain of anything," James replied. "I know it hasn't been long by traditional standards, but Eleanor, we've spent nearly every day together for the past 5 months. I know your mind and your heart. I know how you take your coffee and what books make you cry, and how you get a little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating on teaching. I know you're dedicated and passionate and brave enough to travel across the country alone to teach children in a mining town. I know you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I know you too, James. I know you're gentle and patient and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know you carry grief, but you don't let it make you bitter. I know you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met, and I know I love you." James pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms while the autumn wind rustled through the cottonwoods and the creek sang its endless song over smooth stones. "Will you marry me, Eleanor?" James asked, the words a rumble in his chest beneath her ear. "I don't have a ring yet, and I know this isn't very romantic, proposing in the middle of a field, but I don't want to wait another moment to ask you." Eleanor pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy on James's face was incandescent. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that held all the promise of their future together. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and trust into the contact. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard and smiling so widely their faces hurt. They returned to the ranch house to share their news with the Ramsey brothers, who celebrated with enthusiasm and insisted on opening a bottle of whiskey that had been saving for a special occasion. Maria emerged from the kitchen with tears in her eyes to embrace Eleanor and declare that it was about time James found happiness again. "Catherine was a good woman," Maria said, holding Eleanor's hands tightly. "She would be so happy to know James found love again." "You will be good for him, I can see it in your eyes." The mention of James's first wife might have been awkward, but Eleanor appreciated Maria's honesty. Catherine was part of James's story, and Eleanor had no desire to erase or ignore that. She would never try to replace the woman James had loved and lost. She would simply walk forward with him into their own story. As autumn progressed toward winter, Eleanor and James began making concrete plans for their future. James spoke with the Ramseys and finalized the purchase of the 5 acres he had shown Eleanor. He began ordering materials for a house, working with a carpenter from town to design a modest but sturdy 2-bedroom structure that would be ready by spring. Eleanor continued teaching under the cottonwood tree as long as the weather permitted, and James continued joining her each afternoon. The children had all figured out by now that their teacher and the cowboy were in love, and they treated it with the matter-of-fact acceptance of youth. Young Thomas Miller informed Eleanor one day that his pa said Mr. Thornton was a good man who would treat her right, which made Eleanor smile. In November, the first significant snow fell, making teaching under the tree impossible. Eleanor moved her lessons to the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Patterson's grudging permission. The space was cramped and far from ideal, but at least the children could continue their education. Eleanor lobbied the town council regularly about the schoolhouse, which remained unfinished due to lack of funds and labor. James gave Eleanor a ring in early December, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. They were married 2 weeks before Christmas in a ceremony held in the boarding house parlor since Cripple Creek's church was still under construction. The Methodist circuit preacher who rode through the mining camps performed the service, and half the town seemed to cram into Mrs. Patterson's parlor to witness it. Eleanor wore a dress of deep green wool that she had sewn herself, practical for the cold weather but still pretty. James wore his Sunday best, a dark suit he had purchased specially for the occasion. When he saw Eleanor coming down the boarding house stairs, his eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Eleanor felt her heart swell as she took James's hands in hers. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying a good man who loved her truly and completely. The vows they exchanged were traditional, promising to love and cherish in sickness and health for richer or poorer until death parted them. But when James looked into Eleanor's eyes and promised to love her all the days of his life, she heard the unspoken addition. He was promising to love her with the full capacity of his healed heart, the heart she had helped him find again. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "James, you may kiss your bride." James drew Eleanor close and kissed her sweetly, and the assembled crowd burst into applause and cheers. Eleanor felt happiness bubble up inside her, pure and effervescent. She had come to Cripple Creek broken-hearted and determined never to love again. Instead, she had found a love deeper and truer than anything she had imagined possible. The boarding house residents and various townsfolk had pooled resources to provide a modest wedding supper, with food and drink that kept the celebration going well into the evening. Eleanor's students presented her with a handmade wedding quilt they had worked on in secret with their mother's help, each square decorated with drawings of books and trees and hearts. Eleanor cried when she saw it, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "You've taught us so much, Miss Hartley," Sarah Chen said, speaking for all the children. "We wanted to give you something special." "It's Miss Thornton now," one of the younger boys piped up, which sent a ripple of laughter through the room. "That's right," Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. "But I hope you'll all keep calling me Miss Eleanor or Miss Hartley at school, whichever you prefer. And this quilt is the most wonderful gift I could imagine. Thank you." James and Eleanor spent their wedding night in the boarding house room Eleanor had been renting, which felt strange and slightly awkward given how many people were in the building. But wrapped in each other's arms in the narrow bed, Eleanor felt nothing but contentment. James held her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and deep respect, and when they made love for the first time, it was with the gentle exploration of two people learning each other's bodies and hearts. Afterward, lying with her head on James's chest, Eleanor traced idle patterns on his skin and marveled at how completely her life had changed in just 8 months. "What are you thinking?" James asked softly, his hand stroking through her unbound hair. "That I'm happier than I ever thought possible," Eleanor replied honestly. "That I'm grateful I had the courage to come west. That I'm grateful you had the courage to ask me for help that day under the cottonwood tree." "I'm the grateful one," James said. "You saved my life, Eleanor." Not dramatically, not all at once, but day by day, conversation by conversation. "You reminded me what it means to be fully alive." They talked quietly for hours, making plans and sharing dreams until exhaustion finally claimed them and they fell asleep wrapped around each other. The following morning, James loaded Eleanor's belongings onto a wagon and they made the journey out to the Double R Ranch. The Ramseys had offered them the use of a small cabin on the property until their house was completed. The cabin was rustic, just 2 rooms with a pot-bellied stove for heat and cooking, but Eleanor loved it immediately. It was theirs, their first home together. Over the winter months, Eleanor and James settled into married life. Eleanor continued teaching, now making the journey into town 3 times a week, since the weather often made daily trips impossible. On the days she stayed at the ranch, she worked on planning lessons and reading the books she had brought from Boston, precious volumes she had carried across the country. James worked with the horses, and Eleanor loved watching him. He had a gift for understanding the animals, a patience and gentleness that reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him. In the evenings, they would sit by the stove and talk, or James would read aloud from the newspapers that came sporadically from Denver while Eleanor mended clothes or worked on embroidery. They learned each other in all the small ways that newlyweds do. Eleanor discovered that James sang quietly to himself while working with the horses, old cowboy ballads and trail songs in a surprisingly good baritone. James learned that Eleanor talked in her sleep sometimes, usually about her students. Eleanor found out that James had nightmares occasionally, terrible dreams where he was trying to reach Catherine through the flames. The first time she woke to find him sitting up in bed, shaking and covered in cold sweat, Eleanor simply held him until the terror passed. "I'm sorry," James gasped. "I thought they were getting better." "You have nothing to apologize for," Eleanor said firmly. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, James. Some days will be harder than others, and that's all right. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." As winter gave way to spring, construction on their house began in earnest. James worked on it every spare moment, with help from the Ramsey brothers and some of the other ranch hands. Eleanor visited the construction site whenever she could, watching their future home take shape from raw lumber and stone. The house was simple but well built, with a main room that would serve as kitchen and living space, 2 bedrooms and a covered porch that overlooked the creek. James had insisted on installing large windows to let in plenty of light, knowing how much Eleanor valued being able to read comfortably. There was even a small room that could serve as Eleanor's study, a place where she could prepare lessons and store her growing collection of books. "I want you to have space that's yours," James explained when he showed her the plans. "You've given up so much to marry me and live out here. The least I can do is make sure you have room to pursue your own work and interests." In April, word came that the schoolhouse in Cripple Creek was finally nearing completion. The town council had received a grant from a mining company owner whose daughter had been one of Eleanor's students, and with the influx of money, construction had proceeded rapidly. Eleanor was invited to inspect the building and provide input on its setup. The schoolhouse was a simple structure, 1 large room with a wood stove in the corner and windows along both sides to provide light. But to Eleanor, it was beautiful. There were real desks, donated by families and businesses around town, and a proper chalkboard at the front of the room. Shelves lined one wall, waiting to be filled with books and supplies. "Oh, it's perfect," Eleanor breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "The children are going to be so excited." The schoolhouse opened in May, and Eleanor's first official day teaching in a real classroom was everything she had dreamed of. The children were awed by the space, running their hands over the smooth desks and marveling at the chalkboard. Eleanor felt a profound sense of accomplishment as she stood before them and began the day's lessons. She no longer taught under the cottonwood tree every day, but she made a point of holding outdoor lessons there whenever weather permitted. That tree would always be special to her, the place where her life had changed forever. James and Eleanor moved into their completed house in early June of 1883, 1 year after they had first met. Eleanor stood on the porch that first evening, looking out over the land that was now theirs, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "Happy?" James asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Incredibly," Eleanor replied, leaning back against him. "This is everything I ever wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it." Their first summer in the house was idyllic. Eleanor taught through June and then took a break from formal lessons during July and August, though several of her more advanced students, including Sarah Chen, continued meeting with her weekly for additional instruction. James was busy with ranch work, training a new group of horses and helping the Ramseys with the summer cattle drives. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Maria would visit from the main ranch house, bringing food and gossip. The Ramsey brothers stopped by regularly, and Eleanor grew to love these rough, kind men who had given James work and friendship when he needed it most. It was in late August that Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She had been tired lately, more than usual, and certain smells that had never bothered her before suddenly made her nauseous. She waited another week to be certain, then told James one evening as they sat on the porch. "I think I'm going to have a baby," she said quietly, taking his hand. James went very still. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." James turned to her, and Eleanor saw a complex mixture of emotions on his face, joy and fear and wonder all at once. "A baby," he repeated. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly uncertain. They had not specifically discussed children, and she knew James's first marriage had been planning to start a family when tragedy struck. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," James said, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "Terrified too, if I'm being honest, but mostly just grateful, so incredibly grateful." They went into town the following week to see the doctor, a gruff but competent man named Dr. Harrison who confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. She was indeed pregnant, likely about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in early March. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed through the fall, she continued teaching with modifications. She tired more easily now, so she adjusted her schedule to teach in the mornings when she had the most energy. The children were universally excited about their teacher having a baby, and Eleanor found their enthusiasm endearing if sometimes overwhelming. James was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that Eleanor was doing too much or lifting things too heavy or not resting enough. Eleanor found it both touching and occasionally frustrating. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she told him one evening when he objected to her carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm perfectly capable of doing normal activities." "I know," James said, looking sheepish. "I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe. I couldn't bear it if something happened to either of you." Eleanor's expression softened. She understood the fear beneath his overprotectiveness. He had lost Catherine and their unborn hopes in one terrible night. Of course, he was frightened of losing Eleanor too. "Nothing is going to happen to me," Eleanor said firmly, taking his hand and placing it on her slightly rounded belly. "I'm healthy. Dr. Harrison says the pregnancy is progressing normally, and I promise I'll be careful." "But you have to trust me to know my own limits." James nodded, and Eleanor saw him consciously trying to relax. "You're right. I'm sorry. I just love you so much." "I love you too," Eleanor said, "and we're going to be all right, all three of us." Winter arrived early that year, with snow falling in October and temperatures dropping steadily. Eleanor stopped making regular trips into town for teaching, instead offering lessons twice a week when weather permitted and trusting her more advanced students like Sarah to help the younger children with their studies on the days she could not be there. She spent more time at home, preparing for the baby's arrival. Maria came to visit regularly, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and offering advice based on raising her own 5 children. Eleanor's mother sent a package from Boston containing tiny gowns and blankets, along with a letter expressing surprise, but happiness at the news that she was to become a grandmother. James converted the smaller bedroom in their house into a nursery, building a cradle from smooth pine and placing it near the window where morning light would stream in. Eleanor made curtains and sewed a quilt, her hands busy with preparations while her body grew increasingly cumbersome. The winter seemed longer than the previous year, perhaps because Eleanor was confined more to the house by both weather and her advancing pregnancy. But she found contentment in the quiet rhythm of her days, reading by the fire, preparing lessons for when she could return to teaching, and feeling the baby move within her with increasing vigor. "I think we have an active one," she told James one evening as the baby kicked hard enough to be visible through her dress. "Feel this." James placed his hand on her belly and his eyes widened as he felt the strong kick against his palm. "He's strong," James said with wonder. "Or she," Eleanor corrected with a smile. "You keep saying he, it might be a girl. Boy or girl doesn't matter to me," James said. "As long as you both come through this healthy." Eleanor went into labor on a cold March morning in 1884. The pains started slowly, just a tightening across her belly that she initially dismissed as the false contractions Dr. Harrison had warned her about. But as the morning progressed, the pains grew stronger and more regular. "James," Eleanor called from the bedroom, "I think it's time." James went white. "Now, but it's snowing. How will we get the doctor?" "Send one of the ranch hands," Eleanor said, trying to remain calm despite her own nervousness. "Dr. Harrison said he'd come regardless of weather, and ask Maria to come too. I want another woman here." James nodded and rushed out. Eleanor heard him shouting for Richard Ramsey, heard the sound of a horse galloping away toward town. Then Maria was there, bustling into the bedroom with the calm competence of a woman who had been through this before. "Don't you worry," Maria said, helping Eleanor out of her dress and into a nightgown. "First babies take their time. We have hours yet, probably." Maria was right. The labor progressed slowly through the afternoon and into evening. Dr. Harrison arrived around dinner time, shaking snow from his coat and carrying his medical bag. He examined Eleanor and pronounced everything normal, then settled in to wait. James paced the main room like a caged animal, unable to sit still or focus on anything. Eleanor could hear his footsteps through the bedroom door and found them oddly comforting. He was there, he was with her, they were facing this together. The pain grew worse as evening turned to night. Eleanor tried to remember everything Dr. Harrison had told her about breathing and relaxing, but it was harder than she had anticipated. Maria held her hand and wiped her forehead with cool cloths, offering encouragement and reassurance. "You're doing so well," Maria kept saying. "So strong." Finally, as midnight approached, Dr. Harrison told Eleanor it was time to push. The next hour was a blur of pain and effort, of Maria and the doctor coaching her through each contraction, of her own body doing what it had been designed to do. And then, at last, there was a release of pressure and the thin wail of a newborn baby. "It's a boy," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up the red, wrinkled, absolutely perfect infant. "A healthy baby boy." Eleanor burst into tears of relief and joy as the doctor placed her son on her chest. The baby was warm and slippery, still connected to her by the umbilical cord, and he was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. "Let me get James," Maria said, and a moment later James was at Eleanor's side, his face wet with tears. "Eleanor, are you all right?" he asked, taking her hand. "I'm perfect," Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. "We're perfect. Look at him, James. Look at our son." James looked down at the baby, and Eleanor saw his expression transform into something she had no words for, pure love and wonder and gratitude all combined. He reached out tentatively and stroked the baby's head with one finger, his hand shaking slightly. "He's perfect," James whispered. "He's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Eleanor, thank you for this gift." They named the baby William James Thornton, William after Eleanor's father who had passed away when she was young, and James as a middle name. Little William was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged when he wanted attention but content to sleep for long stretches. The weeks after William's birth were exhausting but joyful. Eleanor recovered slowly from the birth, and James proved to be an attentive and helpful father, walking the floor with William when he fussed at night and learning to change diapers with only a little complaining about the mess. Maria visited almost daily, bringing food and checking on Eleanor and the baby. The Ramsey brothers came to meet William and declared him the finest baby boy they had ever seen, though both admitted they had limited experience with infants. Eleanor's students sent cards and small gifts, and Sarah Chen embroidered a beautiful baby blanket that Eleanor treasured. As spring arrived and Eleanor regained her strength, she began making plans to return to teaching. She had missed her students and the work she loved. Maria offered to watch William during the mornings when Eleanor taught, an arrangement that allowed Eleanor to resume her position at the schoolhouse while still being close enough to hurry home if William needed her. The first day Eleanor returned to teaching, she was greeted with cheers from the children. They had missed her nearly as much as she had missed them. Eleanor found that balancing motherhood and teaching was challenging but manageable, especially with Maria's help and James's support. Life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor taught in the mornings, spent afternoons with William and evenings with her family. James continued working with horses, and his reputation as a skilled trainer continued to grow. The Double R Ranch was thriving, and the Ramsey brothers had expanded their operation to include more cattle and a larger breeding program for horses. William grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything. He had Eleanor's auburn hair and James's brown eyes, and both parents were convinced he was the most remarkable child ever born. One evening in June, as they sat on their porch watching William play with wooden blocks James had carved for him, Eleanor reflected on everything that had happened since that day 2 years ago when James had approached her beneath the cottonwood tree. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't asked me for help that day?" Eleanor asked. James considered the question. "All the time," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to never knowing this happiness. I was so lost, Eleanor. I had convinced myself that the best I could hope for was getting through each day. The idea that I might actually be happy again, might love again, seemed impossible." "I felt the same way," Eleanor said. "I had decided that romantic love wasn't for me, that I would dedicate myself to teaching and that would be enough. I was protecting myself from being hurt again." "Instead, we found each other," James said. He reached over and took her hand. "You didn't just teach me to love again, Eleanor. You taught me that it's possible to honor the past while still embracing the future. Catherine will always be part of my story, but she's not the end of it. You and William are my future, and I wake up every day grateful for that." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I'm grateful, too, for all of it. For your courage in asking for help, for my courage in giving it, for every conversation we shared under that tree. For this life we've built together." William squealed happily, knocking over his tower of blocks and immediately reaching for them to build again. Eleanor and James laughed at their son's determination. As the years passed, their life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. William grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved listening to his mother read stories and following his father around the ranch. Eleanor continued teaching, watching her students grow and learn, sending some off to higher education in Denver or back east, and welcoming new children into her classroom each year. The schoolhouse became the center of Cripple Creek's educational and cultural life, with Eleanor organizing spelling bees and reading competitions, and even the occasional musical evening. Sarah Chen, her star pupil, went on to attend Teachers College in Denver with Eleanor's encouragement, and returned to become Eleanor's assistant teacher, allowing the school to serve even more students. James and Eleanor had 2 more children, a daughter named Catherine Grace born in 1886, and another son named Thomas Edward born in 1888. They named their daughter after James's first wife, a gesture that felt right to both of them. Catherine Grace had James's dark hair and Eleanor's green eyes, and she was as gentle and thoughtful as her namesake had reportedly been. Thomas was a whirlwind of energy from the moment he learned to walk, constantly getting into mischief and making his parents laugh with his antics. The house that had seemed spacious for 2 adults felt wonderfully full with 3 children running through it. Eleanor sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of teaching, motherhood, and running a household, but she was never unhappy. This was the life she had chosen, the life she had built with James, and she treasured every moment of it. James expanded his horse training operation, eventually building a second barn and corral on their property. He developed a reputation throughout Colorado for his skill with difficult horses, and people traveled from considerable distances to purchase animals he had trained. The extra income allowed them to expand their house, adding a larger kitchen and a proper parlor, as well as putting aside money for their children's education. But despite their success and growing family, James and Eleanor never forgot where their story had begun. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they would return to the cottonwood tree on the edge of Cripple Creek. They would sit beneath its branches, just the 2 of them, and remember that July afternoon when a grieving cowboy had asked a teacher for help learning to love again. "It seems like a lifetime ago," Eleanor said one anniversary, sitting beside James on a blanket spread beneath the tree. Their children were being watched by Maria for the afternoon, giving the couple a rare moment alone together. "It was a lifetime ago," James replied. "I'm not the same man I was then. You gave me a second chance at life, Eleanor. You and the children are my whole world." "You gave me a second chance too," Eleanor said. "I had given up on love, convinced myself it wasn't worth the risk. You showed me that the greatest risk is not loving at all, not opening your heart to the possibility of connection." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the rustle of leaves overhead and the distant sounds of the town. Cripple Creek had grown considerably in the 8 years since Eleanor first arrived, transforming from a rough mining camp into a proper town with churches, schools, and established businesses. "You ever regret coming west?" James asked. "Leaving Boston and your family there?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss my mother and sisters. Sometimes I miss the cultural advantages of a big city, the museums and theaters and libraries. But regret? No, never. This is where I was meant to be. You are who I was meant to love." "Our children are the greatest blessings I could imagine." James leaned over and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that still made Eleanor's heart race after 8 years of marriage. "I love you, Eleanor Thornton, more today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "That's lovely," Eleanor said with a smile. "Is it from a poem?" "No, it's from my heart," James replied, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've been working on expressing myself better, trying to find words for the feelings you inspire in me." Eleanor kissed him again, deeper this time. "Your words are perfect. You are perfect." They stayed beneath the cottonwood tree until the afternoon shadows grew long, talking about their children and making plans for the future, just as they had done so many times before. Then they walked hand in hand back to their buggy and drove home to their life, to the house they had built and the family they had created together. The years continued to pass in the way of all years, some easy and some difficult, but always shared. Eleanor watched her children grow and thrive. William proved to be an excellent student who loved books as much as his mother did. Eleanor harbored hopes that he might become a teacher or scholar, though William was also showing an aptitude for working with horses like his father. Catherine Grace was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing and painting pictures of the mountains and animals around their ranch. Thomas was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into scrapes, though his good heart and quick smile made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. James continued to flourish in his work, his skill with horses becoming almost legendary in the region. He never forgot the darkness he had emerged from, but it no longer defined him. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Eleanor was always there to hold him and remind him that he was safe, that they were building something beautiful together. In 1890, when William was 6 years old and starting to help his father with the horses, James received an unexpected letter. It was from Catherine's brother, a man named Henry whom James had not heard from since shortly after the fire. The letter explained that Henry had recently learned James had remarried and started a family, and he wanted to express his happiness for James and his hope that James had found peace. James showed the letter to Eleanor that evening, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it to her. "I don't know how to feel about this," he admitted. "Part of me is glad Henry reached out, but part of me feels guilty, as if moving on with my life somehow betrays Catherine's memory." Eleanor read the letter carefully, then set it aside and took James's hands in hers. "James, loving me and our children doesn't diminish what you felt for Catherine. The heart doesn't have a finite capacity for love. It expands to hold everyone we cherish. Catherine would want you to be happy. Her brother clearly understands that." "You're right," James said, pulling Eleanor close. "You're always right about these things." "Not always," Eleanor said with a smile. "But in this case, yes, I am. You should write back to Henry. Tell him about our family, about the life you've built. It might bring him comfort to know that something good came from such tragedy." James did write back, and in the months that followed, he and Henry exchanged several letters. Henry was married himself now with 2 young daughters, living in Missouri where he ran a general store. Reading about Henry's life helped James feel more connected to Catherine's memory in a healthy way, honoring what they had shared while still fully embracing his present. As the century drew to a close, Eleanor and James found themselves reflecting on how much had changed since they first met. Cripple Creek had transformed from a rough mining town into a thriving small city. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing number of students. The Double R Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, and the Ramsey brothers had offered to make James a partner in the business, an offer he had accepted with Eleanor's enthusiastic support. Their children were healthy and happy. William, now approaching his teenage years, was tall like his father and showed every sign of becoming a skilled horseman. Catherine Grace was 12 and had begun helping Eleanor with the younger students at school, displaying a natural aptitude for teaching. Thomas, at 10 years old, was still the family's free spirit, full of energy and mischief, but also deeply loving. On New Year's Eve of 1899, Eleanor and James hosted a gathering at their ranch to celebrate the coming new century. The Ramsey brothers came with their families. Richard had married a few years earlier and had 3 children, while Robert remained happily unmarried but devoted to his nieces and nephews. Maria came with her extended family, and several of Eleanor's current and former students attended with their parents. As midnight approached, everyone gathered outside despite the cold to watch the stars and welcome the new century. Eleanor stood with James, his arm around her waist. Their children gathered around them and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built. "What are you thinking?" James asked softly as the countdown to midnight began. "That 18 years ago I was heartbroken and alone, teaching children under a tree and thinking my life was settled. And then you came along and changed everything. You gave me a family, a home, a love deeper than I knew existed. I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman in the world." "I'm the lucky one," James replied. "You saved me, Eleanor. You taught me to live again, to love again. Everything good in my life comes from that day when I was brave enough to ask you for help." The crowd around them began counting down the final seconds of the century. 10, 9, 8. Eleanor looked up at James, seeing in his face all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. His eyes held the same love and devotion she had seen the day he proposed, the day they married, the day each of their children was born. This was a man who had learned to love deeply despite devastating loss, who had chosen to risk his heart again and found happiness beyond measure. 3, 2, 1, the crowd erupted in cheers as the new century arrived. James pulled Eleanor close and kissed her thoroughly, a kiss that promised many more years of love and partnership and shared joy. Their children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' display of affection, but Eleanor could see the security in their eyes, the comfort of knowing they came from a family built on genuine love. As the celebration continued around them, Eleanor rested her head on James's shoulder and looked up at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. She thought about that young woman who had traveled west seeking a fresh start, who had found purpose in teaching children to read beneath a cottonwood tree. She thought about the broken cowboy who had approached her asking for the impossible, to teach him to love again. They had taught each other, she realized. James had taught her that love was worth the risk, that opening her heart despite past pain could lead to joy beyond measure. She had taught him that healing was possible, that honoring the past and embracing the future were not mutually exclusive. Together, they had learned that love was not a finite resource, but an expanding gift, growing to encompass children and friends and community, rippling outward from that initial connection beneath a tree. The years continued to unfold with all the joys and challenges of any life well lived. There were difficult times, a severe drought one year that tested the ranch's resources, an illness that struck Thomas and had Eleanor and James keeping vigil by his bedside for 3 terrifying days until the fever broke. There was the heartbreak of watching William leave for university in Denver, the first of their children to venture out into the wider world, though he returned every summer to help on the ranch and eventually brought home a sweet-natured young woman named Margaret, whom he married in 1902. There were moments of pure joy as well. Catherine Grace's first art exhibition in Cripple Creek, where her paintings of Colorado landscapes drew admiration from throughout the region. Thomas's decision to become a veterinarian, inspired by years of watching his father work with horses. The birth of Eleanor and James's first grandchild, a daughter William and Margaret named Eleanor Catherine, who immediately became the light of her grandparents' lives. Through it all, Eleanor continued teaching. She became a fixture in Cripple Creek's educational system, training new teachers and advocating for better resources for students. Generations of children learned to read under her guidance, and many went on to achievements their parents had never imagined possible. Eleanor took pride in each success story, knowing she had played a small part in opening doors of opportunity. James continued working with horses until his body simply would not allow it anymore. In his late 60s, arthritis in his hands and knees forced him to step back from the physical demands of training, though he remained involved in the ranch's operations in an advisory capacity. He took up woodworking in his reduced capacity, creating beautiful furniture and toys for his grandchildren that would become treasured family heirlooms. As they entered their 70s, Eleanor and James finally stepped back from active work, allowing their children and the next generation to take over the ranch and the school. They spent their days quietly, tending a garden, reading together in the afternoons, and entertaining a steady stream of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who came to visit. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, their family organized a massive celebration at the ranch. All 3 of their children were there with their families, William and Margaret with their 4 children, Catherine Grace and her husband Peter with their 3 children, Thomas and his wife Ruth with their 2 children. There were also grandchildren-in-law and great-grandchildren, a crowd of people all connected by the love Eleanor and James had built together. Someone had arranged to string lights around the porch and in the nearby trees, creating a magical atmosphere as evening fell. Tables were laden with food, and a local musician played fiddle while people danced and celebrated. Eleanor, now 72 years old with silver hair and laugh lines etched deep around her eyes, felt overwhelmed by the abundance of love surrounding them. James, at 74, moved more slowly than he once had, but his eyes still held that same devotion when he looked at Eleanor. When the moment came for toasts and speeches, William stood and raised his glass, To my parents, he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. 50 years ago, they took a chance on love. My father was a man learning to live again after tragedy, and my mother was a woman who had traveled west seeking purpose. They found each other, and in doing so, they created all of this. He gestured to the assembled family. Every person here exists because they had the courage to open their hearts to each other. They taught us what real love looks like, love that endures through good times and bad, love that grows deeper with every passing year. To Eleanor and James Thornton, the foundation of our family. To Eleanor and James, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks as she looked around at all these people, her legacy and James's legacy intertwined. They had created something beautiful together, a family built on love and respect and genuine partnership. Later, when the celebration had wound down, and most of the family had retired to various rooms in the expanded ranch house or to their homes in town, Eleanor and James sat together on their porch. It was the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the past 50 years, watching sunsets and storms, discussing the day's events and making plans for the future. "Tired?" James asked, taking Eleanor's hand in his. "Wonderfully so," Eleanor replied. "That was a beautiful celebration. Our family is remarkable, isn't it?" "They are," James agreed. "We did good work, you and I. Raised good children who are raising good children of their own." Eleanor leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling the comfortable weight of 50 years together. "Do you remember that first day when you asked me to teach you to love again? I had no idea what I was agreeing to. I thought maybe we would talk a few times and you would work through your grief and that would be the end of it." James chuckled softly. "Instead, you got stuck with me for 50 years and counting." "Stuck is not the word I would use," Eleanor said. "Blessed, maybe, fortunate, lucky beyond measure." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant whinny of horses and the rustle of wind through cottonwood trees. These were the sounds that had formed the backdrop of their entire adult lives, as familiar and comforting as breathing. "Eleanor," James said after a while, "I want you to know something. Even if I live to be 100, I will never have enough time with you. Every day we've had together has been a gift, and I would gladly live them all over again." Eleanor felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. After 50 years, James could still move her with his words, still make her feel cherished and valued and deeply, profoundly loved. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "You are the best decision I ever made, James Thornton. Teaching you to love again ended up teaching me what real love truly means." They remained on the porch until the stars emerged in full brilliance overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love story and would witness its continuation for however many years remained to them. Inside the house, their family slept peacefully, secure in the foundation of love that Eleanor and James had built and maintained through 50 years of devotion to each other. As Eleanor and James finally rose to head inside, Eleanor paused to look back at the night landscape of the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness was the cottonwood tree where it had all begun, where a broken cowboy had approached a young teacher and asked for the impossible. That tree still stood, a silent witness to the miracle that had unfolded from a single moment of courage and vulnerability. Eleanor thought about all the students she had taught over the years, hundreds of children who had learned to read and write and think critically about the world. She thought about her own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the family she and James had created together. She thought about the ranch and the house and the life they had built from nothing more than hope and determination and love. In the end, it had all started with a simple request beneath a tree, a grieving man asking to be taught how to love again. Eleanor had agreed, not knowing where it would lead, not understanding that in teaching James, she would learn the most important lessons of her own life. Love was not something to be taught from books or explained in lectures. It was something lived and experienced and built through countless small moments of connection and care. As they climbed into bed that night, Eleanor curled against James's side as she had done for 50 years. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close even in sleep. This was love, Eleanor thought as she drifted towards sleep. Not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those had their place. Real love was this, two people choosing each other day after day, year after year, building a life together one moment at a time. Eleanor and James lived several more years in contentment and peace, surrounded by their family and secure in the love they had built together. When the end came, it came gently. James passed first in his sleep on a quiet spring morning in 1936. Eleanor grieved him deeply as he had once grieved Catherine, but she did not regret a single moment of their 53 years together. She continued on for 2 more years, still sharp and engaged with her family despite her physical frailty. She spent her final days surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories about James and their life together, making sure the family understood the legacy they had been given. Eleanor passed away peacefully in the summer of 1938, holding the hand of her daughter Catherine Grace and speaking James's name. She was buried beside him beneath the cottonwood trees on their ranch, the same trees that had witnessed their love story from its beginning. At Eleanor's funeral, William stood before the assembled family and friends to deliver a eulogy. He spoke of his mother's dedication to education, of the hundreds of students whose lives she had touched. He spoke of her strength and kindness, her wisdom and grace. But mostly, he spoke of the love between his parents, a love that had transformed them both and created ripples that would continue for generations. "My father once told me," William said, his voice heavy with emotion, "that my mother taught him to love again when he thought it was impossible. But I think they taught each other. They showed all of us what it means to truly love another person, to choose each other every day, to build a life together through both joy and sorrow. That is their legacy, not just to our family but to this entire community. They showed us that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world. It can heal the deepest wounds and create beauty from ashes. It can transform a broken cowboy and a heartbroken teacher into partners who build something that will outlast them both." As William spoke, the afternoon sun filtered through the cottonwood leaves, dappling the gathered crowd with light and shadow. It was easy to imagine, standing in that place, a young woman teaching children their letters beneath this tree. Easy to imagine a grieving cowboy approaching her, hat in hand, asking for the impossible. Easy to see how that single moment of courage and compassion had blossomed into this, a family and community built on the foundation of genuine love. The cottonwood tree still stands on that ranch in Colorado, now owned and worked by the 4th and 5th generations of Eleanor and James's descendants. The schoolhouse where Eleanor taught still operates, though it has been expanded and modernized over the years. But in a quiet corner of that school, there hangs a painting created by Catherine Grace Thornton, depicting her mother teaching children beneath a tree while a tall cowboy stands at the edge of the scene, hat in hand, taking the first step toward healing and love. The legacy of Eleanor and James Thornton lives on in the hundreds of descendants who carry their blood, in the thousands of students who learned to read thanks to Eleanor's dedication, in the countless horses that were gentled by James's patient hands. But more than that, their legacy lives in the story itself, the reminder that it is never too late to heal, never too late to love again, never too late to take a chance on connection even after heartbreak. Under a cottonwood tree in Cripple Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1882, a teacher agreed to help a cowboy learn to love again. In doing so, they both discovered that love is not something that can be taught, only lived. And live it they did, fully and completely, creating a story that would inspire generations to come. Their love was not perfect or easy, but it was real and deep and enduring, a testament to the transforming power of two people choosing each other and building a life together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one heartbeat at a time. And that, in the end, is the greatest lesson love has to teach.